January 25th, 2021 meeting of the Grafton Planning Board order, conducting it under the remote meeting rules the governor has put out. Two things. Well, all right. Chris, explain how people get to talk to us.
So I'll be monitoring the Q&A and chat features, as well as if there's any, the raise hand feature. We do have the ability to allow attendees to speak in real time. So I would just ask that if you had a comment, to either use the chat or the Q&A, or to raise your hand, and similar to the regular open meeting, the chair will recognize those comments or those raised hands as needed. And that's about it.
Okay. Let's see. I'll check that our members are online, and then we'll get you to touch on everybody else. Dave.
If Dave can find a way to unmute himself, he'll say he's here.
He's here?
Yes.
All right. Well,
give me a moment to unmute.
Justin.
Here.
Linda.
Here.
Oh.
Here.
I'm here. And Vikram.
Present.
Okay. Chris.
I just wanted to make one comment in terms of for open meeting law for attendees or panelists when speaking, other than the identified board members. If you could just include your address and name so that you can be identified in the meeting minutes with the comments. But other panelists that we have, Paul Chase on.
Paul, you need to tell us that you can hear us. You need to unmute. You need to unmute to do that.
I can hear you. I was muted. I'm sorry about that.
It's okay.
We have Stephen D'Angelo.
Yep, I'm here.
Wayne Bellick, it looks like you're still connecting to audio. If you want to shoot me a text, I might be able to help you troubleshoot. Sometimes exiting and rejoining will help to connect to audio. But. And then we have two attendees on currently, Lisa Redmond and Scott Lamont. Thank you for adding your names.
Okay. So have we gotten everybody we want to get?
Yeah, we'll still need to have Wayne connect to audio. That's for 40 Main Street.
That's a little ways off. That's at 7:30.
Yep.
No earlier than 7:30. Since we're talking about that, in case anyone is here for the 11-Wheeler Road, item 6C, I read that we got a request. Actually, I saw it. We got a request to continue to the next meeting for that. So at when we get to the public hearings, we'll have that request. That said, I think we're ready to go. This is where we have public input. If there's anyone in the public who wants to talk to us about something we don't have on this agenda, this is the time. Is there anybody? Seeing none. Discussion. Let's action item. No action items. Discussion items. Anything new on the Mill Redevelopment Overlay District?
No, so I apologize. I still haven't had a chance to reach out to CMRPC, but I will do that.
It reminds me, I think we all want to hear how you're doing. Okay.
Yeah,
You
I'm
look,
not,
you're looking a little better, I think.
thank you. I am doing better. I'm off of isolation, so I'm able to get out of the house and cause trouble out in the world again. But there is some fatigue and congestion that's left over, so I apologize if I'm a little scratchy today. But yep, still recovering, but catching up on what was missed. So
Okay. Subdivision rules and regulations update.
Yeah, so here, I just posted a new draft 2, and there are a few additions to this draft. There's a companion document, the subdivision rules revision status, which sort of summarizes that. But for the meeting tonight, I'll just quickly mention them. Obviously, this wasn't posted in time for board members to actually read through it. So I will hope that we collectively have a chance to read through these and maybe engage in some discussion at the next meeting. But the changes I made for draft 2 were a couple of editorial changes. You might recall that there was a sentence in section 5.10 that I thought was the victim of some misdirected cut paste or something. I found a way to clarify that by comparing it to some rules and regs from other towns. I did a little bit of work on the diagrams, the cross sections of the roads, just to get them to fit better in the document. No substantive changes there. Went through and updated some references to the mass highway documents that are referenced by the subdivision rules. It's just sort of updating some terminology and section references. I modified the curb requirements as we briefly discussed at our last meeting to allow both explicitly allow both vertical and sloped granite curbing, to allow granite to be used where we currently require bituminous to be used. Again, both of these give the applicant more flexibility, and it retains the possibility that the board may require something more specific. And then the other curb change was where we said that with a 2% grade, we insist on granite curbing. I changed that to 5% to be consistent with the majority of communities that I looked at where they had a similar requirement. So ours was unusually low at 2%. The bulk of them are looking at 5 and 6%. I did throw in something, a couple small points related to the separation of intersections. This is something that we will want to take a look at and give some thought to whether this is exactly the way we want it. But basically, I distinguish between intersections, roads on opposite sides of the street and roads on the same side of the street. The opposite side, now I kind of discussed this in my memo on intersection separation from a few weeks ago. And so this just sort of puts into some proposed language for our subdivision rules. The opposite side, we want them to be separated, I've suggested, by the center lines offset by at least 150 feet. That's pretty much consistent with what a lot of other communities do. And then on the same side, that's more an expression of the block length of a subdivision. And there I kind of like the approach Wayland did, which is also kind of implicit in some other towns where in general, they say it's roughly, you want to have at least 2 lots between adjacent side streets. And the way I'm suggesting and this again is something that we want to give some thought to, and just don't take my word for it necessarily, but I'm suggesting that the distance between 2 side streets should be at least 250 feet or twice the frontage for that zoning district. So for example, in an R20 or an R40 rather, the frontage is 140, so the minimum distance would be 280 and there's a 200-foot frontage, the distance would be 400. So this ensures that side streets are far enough apart. An interesting wrinkle on this is considering the flexible development where the minimum frontage is 80 feet. And if you took just 2 times the minimum frontage, that would put side streets just 160 feet apart, which struck me as being really too close together. So that's why I threw a minimum of 250 in there as a suggestion. So that's basically, that really sums up all the changes that have been made in the second draft. And the status document gives you the section references for where these changes have showed up. So with that, since, as I said, none of us really have had a chance to, none of you have had a chance to read through these and think about them, I'm just putting it out there and with a suggestion that we take some time between now and the next meeting, read through the suggested changes and come prepared maybe to discuss that and any of the previous changes. We still really haven't had the time to sort of go through all the changes from beginning to end, and make some decisions about what we want to keep, et cetera. But that's really all I have for now.
I did get a chance to look through it quickly, just scrolling to find red. When I found red, I read it and tried to make sense of it. You changed or put in a speed limit of 30 miles an hour, minimum design speed limit for 30, which is, I suppose, okay. It's interesting though, I don't know that we had that, did we?
Yes, I think, let me just find that again. I think I highlighted that as something that needed some, and then I kind of forgot about it. Where did I put that? Sorry, I'm scrolling through here.
It's there.
Here it is. Yes, so yes, that's highlighted in red, not because it's a change, but because or did I? I might have, that might be a change as well, but there's, I don't see, I think that's highlighted because I was wondering if we wanted to, there are two things about it. Anyway, I think the comment is, the highlights because I commented on it. One, there's a minimum design speed of 25 in the zoning bylaw for flexible developments. And I was wondering whether this is the right place to specify the minimum speed. But I'm pretty sure that minimum speed spec was there already.
Yeah, well, if it's called out in the zoning, it ought to be in the zoning. You can't change zoning with rules.
Yeah, so that was more about, I think that was a question of, is this an appropriate place to even talk about it? But that's something that yeah, no, that is in addition. The current regs don't say that, and I don't remember off the top of my head where that came from. I think there was a suggestion. Maybe it was a suggestion made by Jeff Walsh. I'd have to go back and look and see what the origin of that is.
Well, I know that in the old days, the selectmen used to say that they could post speeds lower than 30, but they weren't enforceable. That 30 was the minimum. That might be a starting point. The other point, of course, is the distances between intersections. I was favoring separating connections to the main road network from internal spacings. I'm not very well disposed to the connections to the major roads being as close together as this would give us. So I think we probably want to think about that.
That's argue about it. Yeah, that's worth giving some thought to. I'm pretty sure that in at least one other town's regulations that I remember reading, there is a different spec for connecting to major roads than there is for minor roads.
Mhm,
So that's worth giving some consideration to.
mhm. Okay, anybody else? Anybody else? Brevo? You want to unmute? There we go.
I got three screens here, and I'm trying to navigate the mouse and trying to literally catch the mouse in one of these screens. So my apologies there. Uh, Dave, thanks for all the effort. I had one question. What was your thought or input on the dead-end streets? I know we had discussed a couple of times on the dead-end streets. I saw some redlining, but did you make? Go ahead.
Yeah, so what I've done so far for dead-end streets was primarily to clarify how we measure the length. I included, I tweaked it so that it addressed cul-de-sacs in a way that may be slightly different from other forms of dead-end streets, because there's some people read this and they read dead-end streets and they're thinking it should only apply to cul-de-sacs. And so I suggested some changes to the rules here. So there, for certain rules, which quite obviously apply only to cul-de-sacs when they talk about turnarounds and that type of thing. But the general definition of a dead-end street stands as we have always had it. And I did add some language to spell out how you measure the length of a dead-end street, whether it's a cul-de-sac or not. The one thing I've not done is suggested any changes to the allowable length, or any other changes that might relate to the allowable length. There's some discussion that we do need to have around that. I have some thoughts that I've not yet put together in my own mind to come up with some details that might need that we might want to consider. The one fundamental principle that I think we really don't want to move away from is the idea that in general we want to discourage dead ends. And the question that comes up is, how long are we willing to allow a dead end to be? Do we want to change that or not? And basically, we probably don't want to fundamentally change it. We can ask some related questions about various possible configurations of dead ends. That is, we might want to look at cul-de-sacs differently than a more complex configuration like a lollipop configuration. We may want to consider various sort of tweaks around the edges, considerations of to what extent do we take into account a piece of land that cannot be feasibly connected in two places. But I think our basic principle stands that we really want to have a roadway network that's connected in at least two different places. And the sticky questions come when that's not feasible. Does that mean it's simply not developable, or does that mean that we have rules that the board can apply when appropriate? And I haven't, like I said, I haven't formulated much of that thinking in my own mind to the point where I can even offer up a set of concerns that I think the board might want to consider. Of course, anybody else is welcome to contribute ideas. I'm certainly not the only one who can do that.
I may, but not between now and 7:30.
This is true. I really wasn't, I didn't want to get into an extensive discussion here, but I think what we're talking about here is probably will help us move forward.
Now, do we have time for 3C, Dave?
I would venture to say that that could take as much as half an hour.
Yeah, and we probably don't want to, in the middle of it, do part of it and then come back later if we can avoid.
Yes, it'd be easier to do it, I think, in one continuous.
So let's move on to general business for now, and don't let me forget about that. Forgot about one. I must have forgotten already. All right, bills. Any bills?
Nope.
No bills. Minutes of previous meetings. I think there was one.
Yes.
Everyone, I'm sure, has checked the minutes.
I've done at least a skim and I didn't notice anything big with these. These are posted late in the day, so I didn't give them a thorough read. But that said, I'll make a motion that we approve the minutes with any discussion for changes to be had during discussion time.
Second.
Moved and seconded. Discussion. Hearing no discussion. Am I missing anybody? All right, take a vote. Dave,
Aye.
Justin,
Aye.
Linda,
Aye.
Prebo,
Aye.
and I vote aye. Motion carries. Staff reports.
So as I mentioned, I'm kind of catching up on things. We did have the RFP had been extended to January 15th. This is for 27 Upton, the redevelopment of the PW site. We did receive at least one proposal, which I can confirm. And I just want to, since I wasn't in the office, I want to track down the mail. It's not our usual process. So just make sure and confirm that that was the only one that was received. But we do have at least one proposal. So that's exciting. And I'll be reviewing that with Carter, and then we'll move that process along, likely before the boards, as it was done in 8 Pine Street. So more to come on that.
Okay. Anything else? Anything else, Chris?
Nope, that's it for now.
That's it. Yes.
Chris, I think I heard something about Noble Mana submitting for us as well. Did that happen?
Who? What?
Through Spinney's business?
I'd have to double check.
If you don't know off the top of your head, we can move on.
I believe there was a submission received. I have to double check where that is in the pipeline.
And a minor detail, the name has changed from Noble Mana.
Oh,
I don't remember what the new name was, but I remember he was before the select board a few weeks ago, to get the name change on his HCA.
Yeah, but I think that's at the other, that's up by the turnpike, not at the DPW. I would hope.
Right. That's 130 Worcester Street we're talking about here.
yes.
I noticed he's made some progress there. Nothing else on staff. Nothing else on staff. Correspondence? Anybody see anything in correspondence they want to talk about? No. All right. Reports from planning board representatives at all the town committees and CMRPC. Dave.
So from the Open Space and Recreation Plan Committee, we're, I think, zeroing in on completing all the updates that the state requested of us. We have a committee meeting scheduled for Wednesday night to go over the action plan and add priorities and funding sources, which the state requested we include in that plan. So we have a meeting scheduled for Wednesday night. And once we get that done, I think that is the last of the updates that need to be made. After which CMRPC can then put it all together and run it by us, I guess, for a double check. And then we'll hand that into the state, and hopefully the state will say, yeah, you're good. And then we start thinking about the next update and try not to make it as late as this one is.
Makes me think of the cable licenses we did years ago. We normally give a 5 or 10 year license, mostly a 10-year license, but it's a 3-year process if you take the whole process that's in the law. And we ended up giving a 3-year license so that as soon as we finished the 3-year cycle, we started another 3-year cycle. Okay, anybody else with reports?
On the library building planning committee, I'm seeing the latest report from Andy, and it's coming up very well. The drywall is in progress. They are getting into or they have already gotten into the second floor ceiling grid. They are done with, they were finishing up the siding work. So the weather is kind. So the external work is happening while the internal work continues. The last I heard was we are marching towards the original plan timeline. He didn't anticipate any major hiccup at this point of time. That's what I heard last.
I'm curious what the siding material is that they're putting on in the center section there as you look at it from the road.
I gotta check that. Yeah, I'll have to check that.
Yeah. It looks like, I'm guessing concrete siding that you usually make out of wood, but you know, it looks like made out of something like concrete. Anyway, it's interesting to see how they're doing that. I think they saved a couple of bucks by doing that instead of brick. Anybody else? Anybody else? Anything anybody wants to hit before we have about a minute here?
I want to say, I think they used to make that kind of siding out of asbestos as one of the materials used.
That might not be what they make it out of now.
I dare say you would not find that in new siding now, but you know, that used to be considered a usable siding material before we really figured out what asbestos could do.
It depends on how it's fixed, though. It's more dangerous if it's loose than if it's bound.
Yeah, that's still true today, as far as I know. If you have asbestos that's not friable, as they say, if it's encased and it's not likely to get loose anywhere, the fibers aren't going to get loose, then it's okay to leave it in place.
Yeah, that I've seen where maybe encase it, but that's better than stirring it up by taking it down, putting it in the air to take it down.
Yep, I've heard about that.
Anybody else? I've got a whole 20 seconds, 25 seconds. I think my clock says 7:30. Public, first of all, let's deal with 6C, Wheeler Road. We have a request to continue that to the next meeting. Request.
I'll also note that in our documents for that, we do have the response from the applicant's engineer to Graves. We don't have anything back from Graves for new plans, but that said, I'll move that we grant the applicant's written request to continue the hearing until the next meeting, which was someone feel free to help me out here while I'm looking it up.
February 8th is the next.
February 8th at 7:30 p.m.
Is there a second?
Second.
Moved and seconded. Any discussion? Hearing none. Dave,
Aye.
Justin,
Aye.
Linda,
Aye.
Bravo.
Aye.
I vote yes. Motion carries. That item will be on our next agenda, 2 weeks from tonight. Now that moves us to SP 2020-10/SPA. Site plan approval at 40 Main Street. We need to read it in this thing.
Yes. As my system just suddenly goes slow. Pursuant to sections 1.3.3, 1.5.7, and 12 of the Town of Grafton zoning bylaws, The planning board will hold a public hearing on Monday, January 25th, 2021, commencing at 7:30 p.m. to consider a special permit application and site plan approval for a multifamily building with 3 dwelling units and associated parking facilities on property located at 40 Main Street, Grafton, Assessors Map 115, Lot 47. Said property is located in a village mixed-use district. The applicant owner is 4027 Main Street, LLC. Copies of the application and plan are available for public inspection on the Town of Grafton website at www.grafton-ma.gov on the Planning Department Development Projects webpage. Pursuant to Governor Baker's March stay-at-home advisory, this meeting will be conducted via remote participation. Please see www.grafton-ma.gov/planning board for more information.
Okay. Chris, why don't you?
Yep, so the applicant Patrick Duffy and his engineer Wayne Bellick are here. We met with the applicants over a course of a few Thursdays at our development team meetings, quick plug for those, to review this project, which I think is a good kind of redevelopment of the space. I'll let Wayne take over. I did just want to note that we did receive, they are before the Conservation Commission. We did receive comments from Conservation Commission, which I think the board should take into consideration. Part of the proposals is a permeable paving grass paver system, and the Conservation Commission is recommending that be included for the entirety of the site. But I'll pull up the plan. Wayne, is there a specific page that you'd like to present from, or?
Sure, Chris, if you'd like to start with the existing conditions plan, please. Thank you.
Yep.
Thank you, Chris. Thank you, Mr. Chairman, members of the board. Thanks for having us. Wayne Bellick, Land Design Collaborative. I'm joined by Patrick Duffy of 4027 Main Street, LLC. As Chris had indicated, we had a few meetings with his group at the Thursday afternoon meetings, which proved to be invaluable. They're wonderful to attend. We can get quite a bit done at those and obtain some feedback from various department heads and board members. So with that, the board may recall that in addition to that, Mr. Duffy and I, Patrick and I had met with you folks, I want to say it was last summer. And we met with you to introduce the project, let you know that we were going to be coming before you, presented some of the challenges on the site, most of them conservation related, but introduced to the board that he was looking to do a 3-unit building in the corner of the property. It was at that time, Mr. Chairman, that I had indicated to the board my appreciation for what you folks have done with the VMU district and the bylaws. I also told the commission that last week. I thought they were well written. I thought that you presented in the bylaw all the different alternatives that you'd like to see in the district, and this multifamily fits nicely in here. And, you know, from that even to the parking. I know that in the multifamily district, what is it, residential, I forgot what the zone district is, but it is that multifamily zone district, which requires 2 1/4 spaces per unit regardless. I think the way you guys have presented this with the various bedroom counts, you know, relating to the parking spaces, I think is wonderful. So kudos to the town for doing that. So with that said, if I could just get you up to speed with where we are. We did meet with conservation formally. We filed a notice of intent and wetland permit application concurrent with this filing. We opened the public hearing with them last Tuesday night and had some very good dialogue with the commission. It was a very productive meeting. We're anticipating, provided that Graves Engineering performs their review, which we understand they're in the midst of doing, they perform their review. We would anticipate closing that public hearing next Tuesday. And with that said, as the board knows, when they are contracted, they do the reviews for both Concom and planning. So with that said, as Chris had indicated, the board, the commission wanted to see some things, which I'll get into when we get to that point. The site is a 0.63 acre site located at the intersection of Cross Street and Main Street. I believe north is up the page of the sheet there, Chris. So, yep, so with north being up the sheet, there are several buildings on the property. At the corner, in the most southwesterly corner is number 40 Main Street. That's the building which once housed the old post office. To the northeast of that is number 27 Cross Street. Both of these buildings are currently residential buildings, each housing 3 units, 3 2-bedroom units. And to the east of that building at number 27 Cross Street is a garage. The garage, I believe, is a garage on a dirt surface. I don't know if there's any real foundation per se, but that's located there. To the northwest of that is a small shed. And to the south of the garage is the existing commercial building. The site, generally, there are a couple watersheds on the site. The perimeter of the site sheds off the site in terms of stormwater runoff. Toward the center of the site, in the back of the building, so if you look at number 27 Cross Street, to the southeast of that, that area ponds in there. When we ran our stormwater calculations, what it indicated is that the whole area was inundated with water. And based on our survey and site observations, there was no indication of any drainage system on the site. The project, the property falls within the 100-foot buffer zone to the Conservation Commission and within the 200-foot riverfront area. As the planning board is aware, there are those performance standards that we need to comply with respect to conservation. And in this particular case, because the site was created and developed prior to August 7th, 1996, it falls under some grandfather in redevelopment provisions of the Wetlands Protection Act, to which the Conservation Commission agreed during our presentation. So again, the site is accessed. So it's got the several buildings, as pointed out. It's accessed from Cross Street with the loop driveway with the center island. It's all paved along the driveway and the parking areas. The rest of the site is landscaped, primarily loamed and seeded. There is a wishing well that Mr. Duffy would like to retain on the property. An important note, and I don't know if the board will remember this, when Patrick and I met with you folks, and when I first met with him on this project, his intention was to maintain the character of the area. And when we looked at it, you know, he's looking at it, he's not a developer. He's looking at this as his retirement for he and his wife, Mary. They're also looking at it for when they pass on, that it be handed off to their 3 daughters. So he's not looking to flip the property. It's all going to be rental, and he would be looking to maintain it himself during his retirement years, which from my understanding is not that far down the road. So with that, like I said, these are the improvements on the property. Each of the buildings are connected to the municipal water and sewer system. There's electric that serves the site as well. If we could, Chris, scoot over to the sheet beyond this one and maybe one beyond that, which would be the site prep plan. And then I'll get into that's the baby right there. So what we are proposing is, obviously with the current improvements on the site, there's going to need to be some demolition of those buildings that are going to be removed. There's going to be the removal of pavement, which is at some point going to become either new pavement or pervious surface area. Because we're working within the 200-foot riverfront area, and it is a redevelopment project. One of the requirements under the Wetlands Protection Act, specifically 1058 CRMR, which is specific to the riverfront area, is that we need to reduce the impervious area on the site. And I'll get into that in a minute. But basically what I want to point out to you folks, first of all, the trees on the property and around the perimeter of the property are going to be maintained and protected. Not one tree is coming down. We are removing, as I said earlier, the garage in the northeast corner of the lot. In the southwest corner of the lot, we're removing that commercial building. And the shed up in the northern part of the lot will also be removed. We had gone out to the site with Graves Engineering some 2-3 months ago and performed some witness soil testing to determine the depths to groundwater and the soils on the site. And what we found is to the north of number 27 Cross Street, we encountered about 2 feet down what appeared to be a concrete slab. We first thought we hit the top of the septic tank, but as we continued to move along to try to find the edge of the septic tank, it turned out to be a backfilled swimming pool. So it looks like there's a swimming pool out there with a concrete cap on it. So we continued to the north. Chris, if you could just scroll up just a hair. So up in that area, you're going to see what resembles, it's a test pit. We had gone out there, we opened up a test pit, and what we found is the first several feet were fill material, typical of a developed site like this. There was fill material for 3 to 4 feet. Below that was beautiful Hinkley loamy sand consistent with the NRCS maps. And then we encountered a highly organic material at about 8 feet down, where we also encountered groundwater. So with that, what we're proposing to do is, as you can see, there is a black thick dashed line on the plan. What those represent are the erosion and sediment control measures. Prior to construction, those will be installed along with any area that we have, any place that we have a catch basin out in the public way. We're going to install a silt sack or inlet sediment trap to prevent any silts that may get out onto the street, which we're not anticipating that. But in the event that they do, it's good practice to install these things so it doesn't make its way downstream to the receiving waters. In addition to that, in front of the site where we have that loop access drive, we're going to put in a anti-tracking pad. So the anti-tracking pad, if there's any vehicles on site that leave the site, when they do enter onto the streets, all the silts will be removed from the vehicle and stay on site. The work that we're proposing on site is not going to result in much earth work being removed from the site. We're looking because the site pre-construction and post-construction are pretty much going to be the same. We're not looking to import material or export material. So that's basically it for the erosion control and site prep plan. Chris, if you could go scroll up to the layout and materials plan, please. Thank you. So if we could just zoom out just a hair so we can get a, thank you. So what you folks see here, this is after everything has been removed from the site. What we're proposing is the access drive is going to remain in that same location. The difference between what is there now to what is being proposed is the pavement. As we're looking at it from Main Street, the pavement comes up fairly close to the street. What we're looking to do is convert that all to lawn into the grass pavers. What we're proposing here is the grass paved 2 type honeycomb system. And that will be located, if you're looking as we come in off of Cross Street, to the right-hand side as you're making that turn and about to head northeast. On the right-hand side, we're proposing several spaces that would be that grass paved 2 system. Again, a couple reasons we're doing that is compliance with the riverfront area requirements and to maintain that character that one currently has when looking at the site from Main Street. To the right of that area, we have a 3-unit building. We're looking at 1.5-story buildings. A total, the 3 units combined are about 2,780 square feet of a footprint. They will be 2-unit bedrooms requiring, based on the parking ratio, 3 2-unit bedrooms require 1.5 spaces per unit or 4.5 units spaces. So with those 4.5 spaces plus the existing 6 units, which require 9 spaces, we're looking at 13.5 spaces, and we're providing 14. As we have it proposed, it is a 24-foot wide access drive coming into the site. We're proposing as you go northeast to the end of the parking area to the left, we are looking at 9 by 20 foot spaces for conventionally sized vehicles. The spaces that are proposed under the honeycomb system to the south will also be 9 by 20. We are proposing compact spaces to the right of 8 by 18. Those spaces there, what we're currently proposing are paved parking spaces, and we're proposing to the northwest side 2 paved parking spaces and 2 green reserve spaces, and I'll get into that in a moment. That's what we're proposing there. To the right, the compact spaces, we are proposing 2 parking spaces there. That would be the paved parking spaces, and then 2 additional spaces which would be reserved. With that said, when meeting with the Conservation Commission the other night, they had asked us to consider all paved parking spaces be the grass paved 2 system to be more sensitive to that riverfront area. They also asked that the reserve green spaces also have the grid system put in it in the event that, you know, the spaces are needed. So that's what we'd like to suggest to the board, and we can discuss that as well. At 27 Cross Street, currently the pavement goes right up to the building on the south side and the east side. We're proposing that landscaping be provided in there. What that will do is that will help promote the groundwater recharge on site. Again, we're looking to increase the pervious area on site to what currently exists. Currently, we're at 400 square feet. If the board allows for the use of the grass paved 2 system on the paved parking spaces, that would give it a nice shot in the arm by promoting groundwater discharge even more to the river across the street. What we would propose is that the main access aisle that leads to that, the 24-foot paved section, would remain paved. A question came up, how does one maintain this system during the winter conditions? Mr. Duffy will be, as I said, retiring and maintaining the property. He currently does. He comes in from his job. He's there on the weekends working on the property. So a couple ways that you can maintain that, and I've seen it done successfully, is taking the blade of the snowplow and lifting it a couple inches and then plowing over that grass area. Again, it's a honeycomb type system. It can take that, the wheel loads of a vehicle like that. In fact, it can take the wheel loads of a fire truck or a rubbish truck because they're placed on a compacted 12-inch gravel bed. If it were my site, I would probably have the snowplow do his plowing, and then I would come through with my snow blower. I would come through and just blow the snow into the backyard, and just so that it's evenly distributed and we don't have the snow piles. Those are the proposed improvements on the site. I'd like to, Chris, if we could, that's the layout materials. Chris, if we could go to the grading and drainage plan, which is 2 sheets down, I believe. So, as I said earlier, if you recall, on the existing conditions plan, to the west or the east side of number 27 Cross Street, there is a belly in that paved parking area that currently ponds up in the various stones of storm events. I don't know if there's an icing condition in the wintertime, but it's not a desirable situation from an engineer's perspective. What we'd like to do is alleviate that concern, and I'm sure that it would be a concern with the planning board had we not addressed it. So what we're proposing in this area is a deep sunk hooded catch basin, double grade catch basin, which collects rooftop runoff from the new building via a 6-inch pipe that would connect into the catch basin. And then from the catch basin, it would flow to a manhole, which would then discharge into the infiltration system. The infiltration system, when we sized it, was sized to accommodate a couple things. One, any increase in the peak rate of runoff, but most importantly, to promote groundwater recharge. Again, the sensitivity to that riverfront area and maintaining that base stream flow in the Blackstone across the street and the associated wetlands, we are recharging groundwater in this area. In order to do that, we had performed what is referred to as a groundwater mounting analysis. The board may be familiar with that. And that is basically looking at groundwater and the influence of any groundwater we introduce into the system. How does that impact that? And the reason that's important is we need to maintain a 4-foot separation from the groundwater elevation to the bottom of the system. However, if we perform a groundwater mounting analysis and determine that that can be less, then it's less. The stormwater is treated as it comes through the system, discharging into the infiltration system, which provides further treatment. And then that discharges via a 3-inch pipe, which ties into the town's drop inlet. The separation between the pipe coming in, the 3-inch pipe and the 15-inch pipe out, is about 2.5 to 3 feet. So it's not going to have any impact on that. I've reached out to the DPW director, Paul Canoyer, to seek his input as well as suggested by the Conservation Commission. When we met with the Conservation Commission with respect to stormwater, they had asked that we seek additional treatment other than what we're proposing. Keep in mind that we are meeting the state regulations. The commission feels that the infiltration system is not adequate typically for maintaining or to remove sediments. I can see their point. It comes down to the maintenance. You know, there is going to be an operation and maintenance plan that's going to run with the property. So they had asked that we do a couple things. One, introduce a stormwater treatment unit. So replace the catch basin with a stormwater treatment unit, which is typically like a storm tech type unit. And in addition to that, we do have, as I said, with respect to our infiltration system, it is oversized. However, what the commission had suggested is that perhaps those pipes that we're proposing that lead to and from the infiltration system, if we could perforate those, they're going to be in a stone bed anyway, that if we could perforate those, put in perforated pipe there so that the infiltration is more evenly distributed across the site. It's a good idea. So we're looking to make those changes. So again, from a grading perspective, we are pitching generally as we are existing conditions, the grades in that area. So we do have a situation where we are directing runoff to that low point as it currently goes. The difference is we are replacing the low point with a catch basin. Utilities, again, will connect to the utilities in the street. So basically that existing building will be served off of Main Street. There's a sewer connection there that we would tap and then continue into the building. The same thing with water. Site lighting, what we'd like to do again is maintain the existing character of the lot. Having worked with the planning board in the past, we share the same thoughts on site lighting. There's some communities that you go into that light projects lit up like a Christmas tree. Not a big fan of that, and based on the experience that I've had with this board, nor is the board. I believe, unless that's changed, but that we've kind of kept it so that we're looking at wall sconces or porch lights, typical of a residential development. Again, at the end of the day, what we're looking at is less impervious and maintaining the character from the street. Architecturally, the building is going to resemble pretty much what we're seeing on site. I think the board may recall that when we met with you, we had looked at a site that is behind the commercial site on the opposite side of Main Street. That there were a few houses on the street parallel to Main Street, which Patrick had liked some of the styles over there, which kind of mimic what we have on the lot. It's not going to be anything, crazy. It's going to be a very modest looking building in keeping with the character of the housing on the lot. The units, 2 of the units will have permeable paver patios, so that any runoff that hits that will make its way into the ground. So that is pretty much the presentation. I don't know if I have anything else beyond that. In terms of the landscaping, as I said, we're not looking to remove any of the trees. I think, for those of you familiar with the site, along the easterly property line, there are some beautiful mature hardwoods and some evergreens. Those are staying. We're not looking to remove any of those. The landscaping on site would maintain. And with the exception, there are a couple of bushes that are in the path of the bituminous concrete driveway, which will be removed and relocated on site. So that's basically it. All the other areas will be loamed and seeded. So with that, I open it up to the board. Thank you for listening to the presentation.
Questions, comments?
I guess I'll go.
Oh.
If someone was waiting, go ahead. Anyway, sorry. Just wanted to say thank you for that, Wayne. It's always a pleasure for me to hear you go through your projects in the detail you do, and with the descriptions that certainly help me, and I'm sure others, better understand what's going on, and I appreciate that.
Thank you.
So I wanted to start with that. And at least for me, just my current thought is the grass pavers for all the parking spaces. If the Conservation Commission wants it and Mr. Duffy and yourself are happy to oblige with that, I have no personal concern with having the parking spaces be grass pavers. I think that would be a benefit for the groundwater recharge.
Thank you.
That's where I'll start. So I'll let someone else go.
Anybody else? I've got a couple things. Anybody else? Okay. You have some of the parking spaces. You're talking about them being compact. I'm not sure that really meets what the building department usually looks for. What constitutes a proper parking space. Just wondering how much negative impact making those spaces a little bit bigger.
That's a great question, Mr. Chairman. If we were to make them bigger, and I looked at that, they would go into the side yard setback. The setback closer to the lot line, that they're not allowed. However, given if the board is in favor of us introducing the grass paver system, essentially it's just landscaping. So you wouldn't have that paved surface. That would certainly help. If that's something the board is willing to do, those could easily become conventionally sized spaces.
I really don't like the really tight parking spaces when I'm trying to park.
Yep.
I have to go some places that I'm gonna take a tape one of these days. I know what they've actually got because they seem pretty tight.
Yeah. And
the other-
even the turnarounds as well. You know,
Mhm.
you get into some places, Mr. Chairman, that you have the tight spaces. Not only are the spaces tight, well, when you go to back out,
Yeah.
it's not a simple maneuver. You're doing a 10-point turn to get out. So that's a good point. Thank you.
Been there and done that too many times.
Yeah.
All right, the other thing is that I think it'd be nice if you could point us to one or more applications of this system for the pavers. That we
Okay.
go see them in real life, the actual on the ground. Because I don't know enough to even know what the questions are. It's just-
None of us claim to be engineers, building engineers.
Or landscapers.
I'm sorry.
I don't think it, I'm away from where the microphone is because we're right next to each other. So we
Yeah.
use this computer. So I didn't speak up enough. None of us on this board really, are doing what you do.
Yeah.
We're all other things. So we don't have familiarity with some of these materials.
Sure. I will inquire in this area, the only place that for this particular application for parking spaces, we had worked, the closest one I can recall was the town of Raynham, which is quite a hike for the board to go. And it was for a municipal low impact development building where we proposed green parking spaces. I can look around. I did a system in Hopkinton, which was grass pavers for driveways. And the purpose of that was to, right on Saddle Hill Road. And the intent was, it was a scenic road with scenic road walls. And there was a conflict between the requirements of the fire department and the scenic road requirements of the planning board. And so we came up with a happy medium where the scenic road wall had returned into the site, but rather than having this opening, required at about 40 feet, rather than have this 40-foot sea of pavement, the fire chief allowed us to go with a 12-foot wide paved access, and then the rest of it was this grass paved tube system. That is the closest location I know of where it has been installed, and that they would be viewable. I can get you the addresses if you'd like.
Yeah, please pass them on to Chris.
Okay, thank you.
He wants an outing. Get out of the house once a week or every month or as much as we need. So anybody else have any questions at this point or concerns?
One question. I have this vague recollection at some number of years ago, the board was looking at a project where a driveway was proposed, or there was a thought, I should say, that a driveway would be, instead of being solid pavement, would be similarly done with something like grass pavers. I'm not sure if it was grass pavers or some other form of permeable pavement. I think, no, I think it was a permeable paving material, not grass pavers.
They were grass pavers. That was unfortunately not a good subject. It was a project I had worked on. That was a few years ago. That was that Brigati Village site.
Yes.
Yeah, no, that's actually not the one I was thinking
Oh,
of. That
good.
that project, yeah, that one, they were talking grass pavers, and I don't know that we ever got to the point of debating whether grass pavers would be good or bad. There were other things that no, I'm thinking of. It was the not the library project, the park project behind the library, where there was a thought to use permeable pavement, but not grass pavers. And the issue I was remembering was there was an issue with having to keep the permeable pavement clean so it would remain permeable. But
Yep.
that consideration is very, very different from anything comparable to I think that particular concern probably does not come up with grass pavers.
You're absolutely right. I'm glad you brought that up. One of the problems with those, so they have the permeable bituminous concrete. Basically what that is, it's pavement. But if you look at the cross section of that pavement system, it's pretty cool. It's porous pavement. But the problem is that when they go to treat porous pavement, if it's not properly treated, as you said, Mr. Robbins, what tends to happen is these systems get clogged and they become ineffective. That is with the application of sands and the like. One of the things that the Conservation Commission had asked and Mr. Duffy has agreed to was not using any sodium-based products out here. So with this type of system, it's going to be similar to what I have at home. What I have at home is a permeable driveway. It's crushed stone. And when in the wintertime, I go through it with my snow blower up a couple inches and it's crunchy underfoot. I don't sand it. I don't do anything like that. So this would receive that same type of treatment. Wouldn't get clogged in the summertime. It's a lawn area. They're wonderful. So we tend to go with those grass paved 2 systems because it creates that green space, and at the same time, it's not subject to those maintenance problems that you get in the permeable paving or even the block systems. So in some cases, the patios that we're proposing for the units, they're not going to receive any sand treatment or anything. But there are some instances where folks use that for permeable parking. And the problem with that is the voids between them get clogged. And then all of a sudden you have your 98% of runoff rather than, having it function as it was designed. So that's a good point. So that's all the more reason why we look at these grass paved 2 type systems other than for the landscape architectural component.
Yeah, I think groundwater recharge is good in general. And I was on the team that created the Water Supply Protection Overlay District way back when. And we were really big. We like groundwater recharge. We like to minimize runoff. We like to keep our groundwater there. And so anything that facilitates groundwater recharge is, other things being equal, groundwater recharge is a good thing.
It's huge.
And a system like this, a system that is likely to last a long time and not lose its effectiveness, would be preferable to a system that, well, it works now, but it's not going to work so well later on.
Right. Good point. Thank you very much.
If you have any pointers to basically product information, what people put it out so we can look through what they have to say. Did you say what was going to happen to that swimming pool?
Yeah. So what they're looking to do before we go on, Mr. Chairman, if you'd like, when the board goes out to Saddle Hill Road, I could possibly meet you out there.
I'm not sure whether we're going to be getting together to do anything.
Sure. Whatever works for you folks, I'll do whatever you guys would like. I can get you the literature as well. And for the swimming pool, what we'd like to do is some of the swimming pool is going to be located within the infiltration system. So a portion of it will need to come out. The rest of it is going to be, I believe, that the pipe that discharges from that the catch basin and makes its way to the infiltration system is going to be on top of it. So my gut tells me that the entire pool doesn't have to come out.
Yeah, Dave's comments made me think of places where you'd use something like that as a cistern to catch rainwater, like say Key West.
Yeah, yeah. Unfortunately, not knowing, I don't want to find Jimmy Hoffa, Mr. Chairman.
Oh, I see. Well, in that case, okay. Do we have anything more tonight? I think there's work to be done before we have everything we need.
Yeah, I think if nothing else, we'll be waiting for the Graves review.
That's the main thing. Although if Graves has any input on these questions we have about the favor and so on, it'd be great because they might even have seen them in use.
Yep. And so here's where I'm seeing this going. My understanding is they currently have the information before them. They don't believe it's going to be that big of an undertaking to perform the review. I will be back before the Conservation Commission next Tuesday. Ideally, what I'd like to do is take away the comments that I've received from the planning board tonight, the Graves Engineering comments, and the conservation comments, make the applicable revisions to the plan, reissue to the planning board and to conservation. In the hopes, I believe that we should be able to close with conservation next Tuesday night. Like I said, it was a very favorable meeting, not unlike this one. We very much appreciate the time of the board. It was a very good meeting. So we will look to address your comments. I will get you the literature. We'll see if Graves Engineering has any information on the grass pavers, and we'll go from there.
Okay. In that case, do you want to request that we continue the hearing?
Yes, we do, Mr. Chairman.
What date are you looking at? Do you think the next meeting 2 weeks is enough?
I believe so. I believe so.
So
Yeah.
February 8th at 7:30 would be the next meeting.
So I'll move that we grant the applicant's forthcoming written request to continue the hearing until February 8th at 7:30 p.m.
Second.
Moved and seconded. Is there any discussion?
I would just point out that there is a Q&A from the public, which should be, doesn't have to be answered right now, but should be
Yes.
into the record.
Don Wilson asked, it is unclear if the amount of parking space meets the amount needed / bedroom per bedroom. 18 spaces needed or not.
So based on, Mr. Chairman, I can easily answer that. We are proposing 2-bedroom units. There are currently 6 2-bedroom units. So at 1.5 spaces apiece, that equates to 9 spaces required for the existing building. We are proposing 3 more units at 1.5 spaces a unit. That's 4.5 spaces. So the 9 plus the 4.5 requires 13.5 spaces. We're providing 14.
Yeah. I think that that question was not necessarily having the right multipliers, the 1.5 and so on. Okay, it was moved and seconded. I don't think we voted yet, have we?
No.
Dave,
Aye.
Justin,
Aye.
Linda,
Aye.
Prabhu.
He's not here.
Take note, Prabhu had to move away during this. Well, we should note that in our record.
Yes, he left 10 minutes ago.
No Prabhu, and I vote yes. And I don't think we need a vote from Vic. And I'm not sure whether you could or not. Motion carries. We'll see you next time.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, members of the board. Thank you very much. Stay safe and healthy. We look forward to seeing you folks in a couple of weeks.
Likewise.
Take
Mr.
care.
Chairman, and William, Mr. Chairman, I do note that we have a raised hand. I know we continued it, but I just noticed that we had a raised hand in the attendees section.
Ah. B.
I think that was me, and I was just sort of just saying thank you, and I apologize.
Yep, that's
All right, so I didn't know it meant other than thank you so much for your time. All
you.
right, thank you, everybody. I appreciate it.
He's too polite a client, Mr. Chairman. He's way too polite. Thank you, folks. Take care.
Right, thank you. Take
Good night.
care.
See you next time.
Good.
You as well. Thank you.
Good. Okay, let's move on to item 6B. 7 Alana Drive. Where are we?
Previously the board had requested some additional materials, including elevations and some revisions to the site plan, some clarifications. We did receive those materials. I apologize that I have not had a chance to review them in great detail. I did briefly go through them today, and I had started discussions with the building inspector. Part of the discussion from the board was whether or not the addition should be included in the percent calculation, the 50% calculation for the addition of the in-law. And so we had some discussion on that, but I had been meaning to review the newly provided plans and materials with the building inspector to get his clarification on those. And I have not been able to do that as of yet.
So at least that is information we're going to need before we close the hearing. I'll get there tonight. Is there anything, any input that we can do tonight? If not, is there a request to continue?
Yes.
Okay. Looking at Justin.
I move that we grant the applicant's forthcoming written request to continue the hearing until February 8th at 7:30 p.m.
Second,
Moved and seconded. Is there any discussion? Hearing none. Dave,
Aye.
Justin,
Aye.
Linda,
aye.
no problem. I'm here. Yes, aye. Motion carries. See you next time.
Thank you.
Thank you. Okay. I think that brings us back to item 3C, fiscal impact analysis. It's about N-1 page is too much in the analysis.
Well, we're going to read through that entire detailed report, aren't we?
Which part of we?
I admit that the report looked very detailed and very useful. I did not read the entire thing. I'm thinking the presentation will help me wrap my head around the report as I read it.
The presentation is more designed for human consumption. The report is for those nerds who want to dig into the gory details.
Yeah.
So
I had a question. Who provided the report? I actually read through this because it was very interesting.
that was me. If we can get started, Chris, do you want to put the presentation up, or can I share my screen and do it?
So I can actually do it either way. I can make you a co-host if you'd rather to control the slides, or I'm happy to do that as well.
Yeah, all that means, I guess, is I have to tell you to go to the next slide.
It's up to you, your preference.
Yeah, why don't you?
Okay.
Since you've already got the capability, you have to
Yep.
set me up to do screen sharing otherwise. All right, so what this came out of, in fact, let's go to the next slide. So we've kind of long heard, what on this slide I'm calling the conventional wisdom. New residential development incurs school expenses for the new students it brings in that far outweigh the property tax revenue generated by the new development. I think we've all heard this, and I got to thinking, and this, I think I started on this nearly a year ago. I started thinking, well, okay, but can we quantify that? Assuming that's true, how big of an impact is it really? Can we even quantify it? And I know some questions of this nature really cannot realistically be quantified, but I set out to see what I could do. So I decided to formulate the question, I think, in the most appropriate way I could to be able to quantify the answer. And that is to ask, if new residential development does add more in school expenses than the property tax revenue it generates, by how much does the added expense increase the property taxes of existing households? The idea is, if that house causes more school expenses than it pays in property taxes, well, we've all got to share, all the existing households have to share the burden of that. So let's get into how we went about answering this question. The answer wasn't as simple, answering it wasn't as simple as I initially thought it would be. I spent quite a bit of time thinking about it, digging into details, taking into account factors that I at first had missed. So anyway, if you can go to the next slide, Chris. First thing I realized is that, actually this wasn't the first thing. I was focused for quite a while just on operating expenses, but at some point I realized, yeah, there are going to be some capital expenses involved as well. And the two categories are treated rather differently. The operating expenses, and this is all focused on, it's on the schools, and there are other aspects of town operations that also are affected by development. Schools is by far the largest from a number of perspectives. Anyway, operating expenses we looked at. Annual expenses for instruction, administration, transportation, utilities, maintenance, etc. Expenses most of these are included in the annual, all of them, one way or another, included in the annual operating budget of the town. And as part of the operating budget, they're paid for via property taxes plus state aid plus other revenue sources. And bottom line is, and the basis for all this analysis was the state's annual per pupil expenditure reports, which include not only the school department's line item in the budget, but it includes additional expense items, which we'll see. And of course, capital expenses at some point, as you grow the population, you need to build more space for students. And so, building, renovation, and construction capital expenses are paid for via normally the debt exclusion rather than the operating budget. Capital expenses are not reported by the state as per pupil expenditures. So it's a whole separate category of things. So move on to the next slide. What did I put on the next slide? Oh, yes. A little bit more about, well, what are these per pupil expenditures that the state reports? The school department operating budget line item, benefits for school employees. Those benefits are paid out of the municipal side, the insurance, predominantly insurance, but a certain fraction of that is on behalf of school employees. So those the town reports to the state, how much of the benefits we pay are for the schools. The per pupil reports also include tuition spent for out-of-district placements, including school choice, other charter school sending tuition. We get charged for students that go to charter schools. And finally, expenses that are paid from grants and revolving funds, which is a whole separate category, but all that is lumped together in the per pupil expenditure report. And I don't think the FY20 numbers are out yet. They weren't out when I wrote all this stuff up, but I was able to estimate it. My estimation, it comes out to approximately 14,000 per pupil for FY20. And that's been going up every year, as we all know. So move on to the next slide. And this is basically in graphical form. This is where the school expenses come from, where the money for school expenses comes from. Property tax, the biggest share of it, is close to 60%. Chapter 70 state aid is right now running around 24%, paying for 24% of school expenses. Other revenue, other municipal revenue that would include, the state's unrestricted general government aid, motor vehicle excise tax revenue, various other forms of local revenue. There's a tiny orange line you can hardly see. We do get some money for choice and charter reimbursement for all the students that are choiced in. That accounts for a little over 1% of our budget for FY20. And then finally, we about 8% of the budget is accounted for. It's funded by grants and revolving funds. But an interesting thing to note, and anybody who's paid attention, this is probably not news, that the trends over the last 5 or 6 years are that Chapter 70 is funding less and less of our schools as a percentage of the total. And to make up for that, the portion of property tax that goes to the schools is going up. So, and this is a consequence of the fact that we are a Chapter 70 minimal aid district. We get $30 per student in additional Chapter 78 every year. I don't know whether that's going to be true this year or not. I think it is, but we have yet to see. But in general, for quite a number of years, we've been getting not even enough Chapter 78 to cover the increase in costs, much less to cover costs for new students. So the trend is really towards the property taxpayers shouldering a larger and larger burden of funding the schools. So move on to the next slide. And now we look at the property tax revenue and try to break that down into how much of it goes to the schools and how much of it goes elsewhere. So your total property tax bill is not quite 60% of that goes to the schools right now. And again, you can see on the graph that that's been increasing. Roughly 29% of your property tax revenue goes to funding other municipal expenses. A little over 3% is going into the road stabilization fund, and then 9.5% is going to pay for long-term debt via the debt exclusions. And of course, this is all before what we passed last spring for fiscal year 21, which adds a municipal capital stabilization fund, and which works similar to the road stabilization fund. But anyway, again, from the property tax revenue right now, just under 60% of the property tax goes to fund the schools, and it's increasing. So that's just sort of a general picture of the sources of revenue for school funding, and kind of put some of this in context. So if we move to the next slide. Now we're starting to zero in on the impact of new development. What do new students add to our existing school budget? The school budget, it goes up every year just because of the increase in cost of doing business. For the last 5 or 6 years, our student population has changed very little, but our expenses have gone up. What we're looking at here is when we add new students, what costs are we adding? And that sort of gets us in the direction of figuring out whether the new development pays for itself. First thing to point out is on a small scale, new development adds no school expenses whatsoever, because a modest number of students can always be accommodated within the existing capacity of the system. We can make classes, we fill up classes. Classes are typically not full at their current class size. We always have room to add a few students. And over time, of course, that adds up. So the increased expenses become real when we're assessing the cumulative impact of continued development over many years. We get to the point, as we did about 15 or so years ago, where we're really squeezing students in. I remember hearing stories about classes being held in stairwells and closets and anywhere where they could find a square foot, they would hold a class, art on a cart, and you're moving teachers from room to room. It was, I mean, you can stretch the capacity of your system quite a bit, but at some point you realize we have to expand. And so but going back to the added cost for new students, as of fiscal year 20, approximately 19% of our current school expenses are fixed. Administration, building operation, maintenance, they don't increase when we add students. You can add 100 students and you don't have to add another fraction of a school superintendent or a central office staff. You may start adding teaching staff or aides or whatever, but there's a lot of fixed expenses, fixed overhead, for lack of a better term. But on a cumulative basis then, taking out that 19% overhead, you can expect a new student to add about, or a new student to add about 81% of that 14,000 per pupil to your total school expenses. So that's the first thing, some of the first things to look at. Next slide. Next question is, how much of the added cost is paid by property tax? We've already seen that as of fiscal year 20, the property tax currently pays 58% of the per pupil expenses, and Chapter 70 pays for 24%. But as I noted, Chapter 70 effectively contributes nothing towards the cost incurred by new students, because we don't even get enough of a Chapter 78 increase to pay for the increased costs, or its share of the increased cost of existing students. So if I assume that things continue as they are, effectively the property tax has to pick up not only the 58%, but also the 24%, because Chapter 70 is not helping out. So that leads to the conclusion that 82% of that added per pupil expense must be paid for by the property tax. So let's move on to the next slide. Now, as far as calculating the total impact on taxes, as I said, we're looking at the cumulative impact of some large amount of development on the taxes paid by the existing taxpayers. So Grafton currently has about 7,600 7,600 households or occupied dwelling units. And I was trying to think, well, how much are we likely to add? Go back to the master plan, the comprehensive master plan we did in 2001. CMRPC estimated the maximum build out based upon the zoning that was current then and really hasn't changed significantly. They estimated that at the most we would add 3,000 more households to the 7,600 we now. In other words, they estimated the total build out to be somewhere around 10,500, 10,600. So I'm going to say, for the purposes of this analysis, we might add 3,000 more households beyond what we have today. As a side note, CMRPC estimated that the likely build out would be somewhat less than that 3,000 maximum, because they thought they would take into account an estimate of the amount of land that's actually would not be able to be built for any of a variety of reasons. But I'm sort of looking at the worst case here and say, well, maybe we might add another 3,000 from now to whenever. And although the time scale isn't really relevant to this analysis, at recent historical rates of development, I would estimate that it will take 30 or 40 or maybe even 50 years to add that 3,000 households, 3,000 dwelling units. Some combination of homes, multifamily buildings, condos, whatever. An interesting observation then that came up as part of trying to figure all this out, looking at the NESDEC report, they estimated the increase in school population over the next 10 years. And some of the interesting historical data there, turns out that between 1990 and today, It's been pretty consistent that considering all households in town of whatever kind, there's an average of 0.4 students in the Grafton school system per household. Yeah, that doesn't include students that go out of district or are homeschooled. But on average, a household contributes 0.4 students to the Grafton schools. So given an idea of 3,000 more households we could get at 0.4 students per household, that works out to be that, well, ultimately we can expect to add another 1,200 students to our school system. Now we can calculate based on the fraction of the per pupil expenditures that are variable with the number of students. Based upon the fraction of that, that's going to be paid by property tax. We can calculate the total expenses added by all those new households. We can then calculate the tax revenue for those new households based on the current average tax per household. And that ends up giving us the excess of school expense over the tax revenue, if any. Possibly the total added expenses could come in at less than the total added revenue, but assuming it comes in at more, then the excess is what has to be shared by all households, current and new. And that's the number we're looking for. So I think we see the numbers on the next slide. Not quite. Funny, I looked at this earlier today and I forget the exact order of slides. But anyway, so I guess one of the points here is all of this is assuming that things continue on in pretty much exactly the way they are in terms of Chapter 70, in terms of expense increases, in terms of all that. But given some uncertainty here, I mean, we don't know that things are going to always be the way they are now. I calculated several possible outcomes in terms of the increase or decrease in the average household tax bill, accounting for possible changes in Chapter 70 and in current trends for the school share of property tax revenue. So I didn't come up with a single number, come up with a range of numbers here. And just to point out that this is looking at the average tax bill for all houses, all households. It's not looking at a number for the average single family home. But the percentage increase is probably what's key here. The percentage increase depends on, obviously, the size of the tax bill. But the percentage increase will be the same. The tax bill will make the dollar amount different. And also one could note that a build out less than the maximum will pretty obviously have a lower impact. But let's move on. And here's the numbers. And if I look at the percentages that exist today, the 58% share of property tax going to schools and the 82% that we feel the property tax would have to contribute because of no Chapter 70, it works out to be about a 3% impact of all that new development, cumulative impact. But that's an unlikely future scenario because, as we noticed before, the trend has been for the property tax to pay an increasing, the trend is for a larger and larger share of property tax to go to schools. So at the current trend, assuming that continues over quite a number of years, I looked at a number of different numbers, but it kind of looked to me like a fairly likely long-term continuation of the trend would put us at 66% of property tax revenues going to the schools. And with a continuation of the current Chapter 70, that long-term trend suggests that we're more likely to see about a 1% increase in the tax bill. Again, reminder, this is operating expenses. We haven't looked at cap expenses yet. Long-term at the current trend would suggest about a 1% increase, a 1% impact on existing homeowners, existing property owners for the development of new residential, My mind is wandering here. A 1% impact on existing property taxpayers for the costs incurred by the new development. But of note is what could happen if things change. Going down to lower rows, I'm estimating what the impact would be if Chapter 70 begins effectively funding some of the expenses for new schools. I didn't carry it out to where Chapter 70 continues paying 24% of our school expenses. I'm not that optimistic. It does seem possible that at some point political pressure from the municipalities, because we're not unique in this regard, having to bear having our property tax payers having to bear a larger and larger portion of the school expenses. So I'm suspecting that pressure will eventually result in Chapter 70 kicking in at least some of the costs for new students. So I've projected a couple of increments of 5% here. So 77%, the 77% line suggests that Chapter 70 starts paying about 5% of the cost of a new student. At that point, if you look at the current trends at the 66% column, that basically, it's a break even. Lower percentages, it's still an impact. One step farther down, if Chapter 70 gets to be to where it pays 10% of the cost of a new student, now it's looking much better that if our school share property tax goes up a little bit, up to 62% or more, it's a break even. And then Chapter 70 up to 15%. Now we've got no impact at all. In fact, the new development really pays for itself. It more than pays for itself. So the other direction of change is to look at our trying to reduce that long-term school share of property tax. For that to happen, either the school expenses overall are being reduced or we're passing more overrides. So the overall tax bill is less, but the school's percentage is not as much. I'm not sure that either one of those scenarios is really comfortable, but that's the kind of thing that can happen. So bottom line here, looking at the operating expenses, is current trend looks like a 1% impact. Improvement in Chapter 70 makes things look much better. Things can look a little worse if we have school expense reductions or more overrides. In fact, if we go to the next slide, I think I've pretty much said most of what the next slide says. So let's move on. We do have to make space for these new students that we're seeing coming in. And as I've noted, major capital costs for buildings and renovation and new building, we include those, we pay for those through the debt exclusion portion of the property tax. And for the purpose of this analysis, I'm going to assume that debt service continues more or less at the current level, at the 9% it is now. And what's been happening over the past years, as current debt is retired, we feel we're able to take on debt for new capital projects. And we tend to manage the time in capital projects so as to keep the debt service roughly at or below the current level of around 9%. So the question we now want to answer is, when we're looking at the new development, what will be the impact of the cost of new school space on the property taxes of existing households? Same idea as what we've just been looking at for operating expenses, but calculating that is different because of the way capital expenses work. So let's move on. How much new space are we going to have to build? Assuming our maximum build out of 3,000 households, which gives us 1,200 new students we have to accommodate on top of the 3,200 students more or less that we currently have. So that says that we'll need to have enough building capacity for 4,400 students. Our current building capacity is roughly 3,600 students. Now, that comes from the space needs study we did about 15 years ago, sort of validated by looking at a recent school committee, I think it was a budget document, which basically listed the number of classes and the number of students in each building. So again, estimating 3,600, the capacity we currently have at 3,600, which means we will need eventually to build capacity for another 800 students. How big is that? Again, going back to that space needs study, it's roughly 200 square feet per student. So we're going to look at building another 160,000 square feet. The next slide shows us about what we can expect to pay for that. (2020) school build, MSBA, that's school building of, I don't even remember what MSBA stands for. They give us half the money for our schools. And their 2020 estimate is about $350 per square foot. The reimbursement rate we can expect is 50% or better. I'm going to be pessimistic and say we only get 50%. We got, I think, closer to 60% for the high school, some 10 years ago. So our cost, what we will have to bond for, is estimated here at about $20 million. And if you assume a 3% bond interest rate, we're looking at a total cost over 20 years of we're going to be putting out about 36 million, almost 37 million. Now, calculating the impact of that, let's go to the next slide. And here I'm looking at 3 different possible numbers of new households. The 3,000 is a good, that's the number we've been looking at most, worst case. But then we want to look at, there's 3 possible bond repayment periods that we can think about. If we do this whole, add this whole 800 students, or 600 or 400, add them all as a single building project, it's one borrowing for 20 years. That's a 0.68% impact on the taxes of existing households. If we look at more than one building project, and I'm just this is just sort of a wild guess, but if we're ultimately going to be adding capacity for 800 students, we're probably not doing it all at once. But here, it's hard to estimate this precisely, but we'll just take as a guess, we do multiple projects. They may be overlapping, but ultimately we're going to be repaying those bonds over a period of 35 years. You can take kind of an accountant's look at it and say, well, your building lifetime maybe is 50 years. So wouldn't you sort of amortize or calculate the cost over that full building lifetime? Yeah, you might, but that's less meaningful. Anyway, next slide. Sort of looking at these numbers for capital expenses, in the higher growth scenarios, the maximum build out of 3,000, say, where all the required expansion is done as a single project, averaging the impact over a single 20-year bond. Here, the new development increases the tax bill for existing households by less than 1%, 0.68% over that 20 years. And in all of the other scenarios, however we calculate them, it appears that the new development pays for the entire capital cost of school expansion with money left over to help pay for other capital costs. So the picture for capital expenses generally looks pretty good. And of course, the last thing we want to do is put the capital and operating expenses together and summarize that. And that's in the table on the next slide. And we're almost done with the slides. And again, this sort of looking at going back to the operating expense slide where we looked at the variations in the current trend, looking at the current trend, the variations in the school's share of property tax and the variations in Chapter 70, adding in the capital expenses doesn't change the numbers a whole lot. But again, the current trend is 1% plus or minus impact, and Chapter 70 improvements make things look better. You can study these numbers at greater length if you want to. I just want to go to the last slide and talk about what, putting all this together, what does this tell us? The inclusion of capital expense does not significantly change the story. The impact is mostly due to operating expenses. At the maximum potential growth, property tax will be about 1% higher, a bit more or less, 30 to 40 years from now than it would have been without the new development, which actually is an increase if you think about it. If it's 30 to 40 years, it's maybe 0.03% per year. And that's true if current trends continue. If Grafton remains a Chapter 70 minimum aid community, and if Grafton uses an ever increasing share of property taxes to fund our schools. And you can note that as the school's share of property tax increases, the impact of new development decreases. But this means that non-school expenses get a smaller piece of the pie, though the pie may be bigger due to overrides. And I've said this enough already. If Chapter 70 increases enough to fund about 10% of the cost of new students, the new development does not appear to raise anybody's taxes. So having said all that, the results I found kind of interesting. And I started this out, as I mentioned at the beginning, expecting to more or less confirm, but quantify that new development significantly increases, or it fails to pay for itself in a significant way. And I have to say that looking at it this way, under one set of assumptions that current trends continue, new development does indeed fail to fully pay for itself, but the impact on existing taxpayers is a lot smaller than I thought it would work out to be. And if the state steps in and helps us a little bit more with some Chapter 70 increases that track our new students better, turns out new development doesn't necessarily cost us anything extra at all. And I guess finally I'll say that it's entirely possible that I've missed something important here that changes the outcome. But I did include in my work, I spent some time with Dan Gale, and it was really I credit him with reminding me that we are a Chapter 70 minimum aid community, and that makes a difference in these calculations. So with all that said, if there are any questions or comments, I'd be happy to hear them. Otherwise, just leave it on the table here as something that might be interesting.
Well,
So,
no, Justin, go ahead.
okay. So first off, this was a lot of work, and even just the presentation side of it was a lot of work from hearing you describe it. So thank you for that. I definitely appreciate the effort put into it. My one question that I have right now is the 0.4 students per household. Was there any consideration in your work for type of development or type of household in terms of number of bedrooms or apartment versus, like a rental unit versus an actual home, anything like that, to calculate those number of students? Or is this more just the sake of average per student per per household built?
Yeah, so this comes from, I saw it initially from the NESDEC report, but what it is you take the total number of households in town and you look at the total number of students in the Grafton schools. You basically divide the number of students in the Grafton schools by the total number of households in town, and the result is 0.4. You might find it surprising until you realize that, I had a note here. until you realize a couple of things. This is all types of households from 1-bedroom apartments to condos to 2-family homes to 2-bedroom homes, 3-bedroom homes of all sizes and types. It's just overall. And you have to realize that around 36% of all the Grafton households include school-aged children. So that's one thing to note. As I did mention that around 12% of the school-aged children in Grafton are either homeschooled or attend schools somewhere other than the Grafton schools. But this 0.4 students, that number fluctuates a little bit, a plus or minus, but it's been essentially constant from 1990 through today. So even though we've seen, well, generally speaking, we've seen more of the recent development being 3 or 4-bedroom homes, this average really hasn't changed. It's a little bit surprising, but the number has been remarkably consistent over the years. I think it probably also reflects the demographic trends towards smaller families. So back in the 1960s and 70s, the average number of children per family was significantly more than it is today. But the demographic trends are in the direction of smaller families, and that NESDEC report, and I don't know, the school department probably, there might be a copy of it available there. I don't remember where I picked it up from, but they go into a lot of that, the demographic trends and so on. And the NESDEC report, they did this in 2019, projecting out the increase in students, and they projected a lower pace of development per year than I'm guessing here. At the pace of development NESDEC was looking at, their recent, the last 6 or 7 years, we've had, since around 2007, as a matter of fact, we've been building about 50 houses per year in Grafton, 50 dwelling units per year, mostly houses. And if we continue developing just 50 a year, it's going to take us 60 years to build out to that 3,000. I'm suspecting that we might average more like 75 to 100 per year, which is where I came up with my 30 to 40 year guess for the time frame for this. But yeah, I was somewhat surprised to learn that overall the average of 0.4 students per household in the Grafton schools has been remarkably consistent, at least since 1990, and I don't have numbers going farther back than that.
Dave, one question. First of all, thanks for this very detailed analysis. It's amazing how much work must have gone behind it. This just set me to think. I came to this town 16 years ago, and at that time the property tax rate was 0.9 per thousand value of your home, and today it's I think 1.7. I'm just curious if the school percentage is so high, then over the years have we increased a lot? Have you put a lot of money in the school system? I know the new building came up and fire department and police station and all that. And maybe it's my lack of knowledge on how property tax works, but I was just curious how the increase has happened, almost doubled in the last 16 years.
Yeah, I mean, overall, I don't know that I can speak with authoritatively to the overall long-term history of the property tax. I know that pretty consistently over the years, the school expenditures have been increasing at faster than the rate of inflation, and generally speaking, faster than the rate. I mean, overall, the proportion of property taxes going to schools versus going to non-schools has been trending the way that chart that one of the graphs in my presentation showed how that's been trending. But I didn't include numbers going back farther than 2015, partly because 2015 was the first year of the 2014 override, and enough changed before that it begins to be more of an apples to oranges comparison. Although one could, if one wanted to, probably work out a way of looking at the longer term history of that, but I can't really speak to that.
I see Rob Auberg left us a comment, but he had to leave before we got it read. He says the 0.4 students per household is the average existing, right? Do we know what the number is for new houses? If it is 1.5 students per house, that would be a very different set of numbers. And then he says, consistent since 1990, great statistic.
Yep. Yeah, this is, when we think of new development, we tend to think of new houses being built, 3 or 4 bedroom houses, and we tend to think of them as a 3-bedroom house probably is at some point is going to contribute at least 1 or 2 students to the schools, and it's thinking long term, which I tried to do for this study. You have to look at it a little bit differently, because any given house, if it includes students at all, and only 36% of the households in Grafton, houses, apartments, and everything else, only 36% of them even have school-age children in the first place. But a house that does have school-age children is going to have them, they're going to be in the schools for a finite period of time. A maximum generally of 13 years, 1 or 2 more if they're going into the pre-K program. But the students are going to come and the students are going to go. So most houses are not going to continually have students in the school system. You would if you, well, now my kids have graduated high school, so I'm going to sell the house to a family with young kids. So in some cases, yes, a house may end up having kids in schools most of the time. But in general, that's not true. The house I live in right now, as of right now, the house has been in existence for 42 years. And over that time, counting all the students this house has ever put into the school system, it averages out to 0.7 per year. And the longer I stay in this house, the lower that average goes. So it's an important fact to think of when you're thinking of the impact of new development, that the houses may put students in most of the new houses, the typical 3 and 4 bedroom houses. Most of them are going to put students into the school system for a finite period of time, but not for all time. And some people are going to buy a 3 or 4 bedroom house with no kids. They just like to have the extra rooms, and they'll use the bedrooms for something else. And once your kids leave home, and unless your kids live at home for the rest of their lives with you, but that's, that can happen, but that's not the ordinary situation. So most of the time, you have to think long term when you're looking at these impacts.
Okay, well, I quickly looked through this before, and I said what I thought it was going to say. When I look at a study like this, and this is very good, Dave, people can come back and find the information, and it's reasonable information to base what you're doing and that. Really good work. When I look at this, though, we're playing around in the 1% range, 2% range when we get down to the actual answer, one way or another. I look at all of the uncertainties that there are looking out 30 years, and even the uncertainties in the way this is looked at shorter term. And I would say that that's almost in the noise. You can show this supports what I would say when someone says it's going to cost a whole lot more in taxes, and no, it isn't. And then there are people that say, "Oh, good, more houses. That'll be more taxes. That'll be good. That'll help." And at that level, it's good. It says really, it's in the breakage around the edges as to whether to go up or down. In other words, more or less of a wash. There are all kinds of uncertainties in the numbers. They keep making new schools cost more per student than they used to. You look at what the old high school cost per student, you look at what the new high school, well, you look at what they had to put in for the previous high school and what they had to put into the current high school. More stuff. We keep putting more staff in because somebody or other keeps telling us we have to have more staff jobs for the same number of students. Remember that at one point we were looking at a new school and people wanted to use go back, turn the municipal center back into a school. And the answer was, no, you can't do that because the rooms are too small. The rules have changed. And that keeps happening. So that's an uncertainty. I'm not too sure about your cost of building costs, Dave. You build a school for 800 students for 56 million. I remember that our most recent school building project built roughly that many students, and it cost what, 70 or 80? I think it was 70 or 80. And the next one will cost more per student than even that. So the point is that there are too many moving things to actually say, oh, good, we can handle 1.2, but 1.3 would be too much. You know, that's just not the level we're at. So I think it's interesting. It says it's pretty much a wash at this level. I think people do care about when all of a sudden they get hit with a new override for a big school. I don't care what the averages or anything else is. My taxes are going to be higher next year than they would have been if I hadn't voted for that. One of the factors to look at is how much of it. The way that evens out, as you said, was the town fathers have tended to try to keep the debt constant. You know, when we pay off one thing, then we do something else. But you want to look at the mix of how much of that is school and how much of that is not municipal. So anyway, great. I think that if the cost per student is really somewhere near neutral, which I always thought it was. I think our cost goes up a bit per student. Dave, you know what Kirchhoff's law is. The amount in equals the amount out eventually, or the amount out equals the amount in. Generally of current, but I'm talking about dollars.
Yeah.
You remember that? And if you run around a circle, it comes out zero for voltage.
The thing that strikes me, Bob, just to say it real quick, the thing that strikes me from what you were saying is, even these numbers, there's a little bit of give and take, so this could be considered in the noise zone. But even that said, it's very clear we're not in a major swing for 20-30% increases for for adding new households. So it's a very marginal thing that is almost a wash. So to me, my takeaway is there's really nothing to worry about, mentally, adding new housing with regards to school costs. The school costs are going to change with inflation and things like that as well, and very marginally will they change for new students, either up or down.
Right. I would, in this context, I think we've mentioned this before as a board that we do not, will not, and cannot use increased school expenses as a reason to deny a development project. So I mean, that's pretty much an established fact. I've heard that there are some recent court decisions that sort of affirm that, but we've taken that position as a board for some time when such concerns are raised by the public in connection with the new housing development. So the value the value of this study that I did seems to me at least, was to knowing that there's a good deal of uncertainty, and I captured some of that uncertainty in the analysis here. But within the range of uncertainties, what this study did reveal to me was that it's kind of a wash. It's it's not this major negative impact on the town as maybe some of us had thought it was, or some people think it was. It's kind of a wash. I certainly would not use the results here as an argument in favor of more development. There's nothing in here that says that new residential development is going to really help us out tax-wise.
Right, and that's what I was getting around to. This kind of makes the tax impact a neutral in the discussion, and allows us to look at the other things that more development does. One is that it exposes us to those overrides every so often to build new schools, and other. We just had an override just for operational costs of the school, and I'm not sure that that's not going to continue to happen, because inflation is not going up nearly as fast as school costs. And in fact,
there's a whole nother calculation that you can do, and I, as a side effect of this, I took a little side trip into a calculation that how much can the school expenses increase without changing the proportion of property tax that goes for schools, and without an override. And that number works out to be a little over 3%.
Schools are asking for 5%.
Right. That is to say, you can stabilize the ratio of school to non-school expenses funded by property tax only if given recent historical rates of increase of property tax and other sources of funding, the schools would have to limit their expense increases to 3% and change. And that's well below the recent historical rate of school expenses increases, which we are consistently told is just enough to maintain the current level of service.
Yep.
So really our revenue increases cannot keep up with our cost increases.
That's in order to remain compliant with changing requirements coming from Capitol Hill, from Beacon Hill. That's, we keep hearing, is a large part of the reason that the costs go up at 2 or 3 times our ability to catch up to it, at least twice. Anyway, what I was getting to is there are other considerations in place. Quality of life for everybody who's here. That the town is going to grow. Town has been growing a whole lot since I got here. Once the state hospital closed down, I don't know, it was what, 40% of what it is now for population, 8,000, something like that. I read somewhere, maybe a little more. So it will continue to grow. But what I've always advocated is a very moderate rate of growth, consistent with what, back when I first ran, we had seen, ran for planning board, we had seen over many years, where most of the construction was being done by local developers, build a house, that finances the next house in the subdivision, moves along a few houses a year in each of a few subdivisions. And the town accommodated that quite well, I think. So anyway, all of those factors come into really what, at least for me, how fast, how much growth, and how fast it ought to be moderate. I know other people think we should throw everything to the wind, build as much housing as possible because it's a good thing to do. It helps the state.
Yeah, speaking of growth rates and building rates, among the historical data that I looked at, building permit records. Again, this is from the NESDEC report. They looked at the rate of building from 1980 through 2018, and there were two peaks where we built nearly 300 units per year, around 1987 and 2004. And including those peaks, the long-term average from 1980 through 2018, we built 97 houses per year. The median, which given those peaks, the median is probably a better overall measure, was 62 per year. And as I mentioned before, from 2007 through 2018, we've averaged about 50 per year.
Yeah.
So the pace, the pace of building has varied fairly widely over the years.
Well, I think
We had a couple big years, but it's been slow ever since then. And it may pick up some. We have, the 8 Pine Street is a single project that could add, I don't remember the number, 400 or so units in one project. So that would be kind of an outlier. You don't see prospects for that scale of development really anywhere else in town.
I'll note that the peak that hit 87-ish, just before things crashed, actually, that pressure and what was happening there probably had a lot to do with why we got the zoning bylaw total redo in 86. That is, it was reacting to what was going on with growing pressure, which reflected, I think, what the town didn't want to grow super fast, and they felt they were. So, okay. Does anybody have anything more they want to contribute on this tonight? I think great report, and it will be made available presumably, so it's easily found more widely than just by looking up this meeting, because I imagine people beyond Grafton would like to see it. Even pass it on, Chris, to CMRPC, just put in their file. I think that would be good. If there's nothing else, we don't need to extend beyond 10. And I don't know, is there anything else which may lawfully come before us?
About a motion to adjourn, could that lawfully become for the board?
I'll recognize that motion.
second.
Second.
Second, and that's not debatable. So, Dave.
Aye.
Justin.
Aye.
Linda.
Aye.
Prabhu is still not with us. And I vote aye. We're adjourned. We'll see you in 2 weeks.